Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. We continue with our conversation on Daybreak this morning as we look at how the government has fared 1 year down the line. In studio, I'm engaging a panel of 3 gentlemen and a lady. Gabriel Muduma, a governance analyst. We are also having Eric Theuri, President LSK. Also with us is Wilkista Aduma, Executive Director, run for office. And from TISA, the program manager is here, Eric Kinaga. And we continue this conversation. Before we went on break, we were talking about some of the issues that, probably would justify or not the rating of President William Ruto's, government so far. Some giving it a 55%, others saying that it is actually very generous for him to get that. But this is what we want to discuss further and get to know the nitty-gritties of how he has fared as a head of state. And Gabriel, I'll come to you because one of the things that President William Ruto passionately promised Kenyans, his campaign was pegged on, restoring the state of the economy. Correct. Addressing the issue of the cost of living. And he came with a plan and he said, this is what I want to do and this is the strategy. I was looking at the numbers that were given by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics the other day. And what it is indicating is that there is a rise in the prices of basic commodities. Sugar has gone up by up to 60%, over 60%, beans 27%, maize flour 9.6%, electricity and cooking oil, and I can go on and on about cooking gas. These are the things that the common mwananchi on the ground find important. The price has gone up. How do you justify what Ruto has been able to do 12 months down the line? Has his plan worked?
Well, thank you. By the way, it's not a matter of justification. Actually, it's a matter of, first of all, understanding where the economy was. And I've told people, for you to understand the whole thing, and again, we are really swimming on the boat of fairness here. You must understand what I keep calling the economic degradation process. It does not happen within a year. When an economy is really going bad, it actually starts way far. And it can actually give you a sense that everything is working. But your economy is really bleeding. And that's where we were. So when the president came in and he suggested things like removing the waivers, all right, which we know, most of them, if people again were to be honest, they were not reaching the intended target. When he said we are really going to look at the production of things, he knew what he was saying. And that's why I said, from an economic point of view, we were really skating on thin ice. And that is why he put a very good team that looked at the economy holistically, because that's what we needed. We needed to know where were we bleeding, all right? We were deep, heavy into borrowing. And this is how the plan came to be. It's not that people sat down and they thought things on top of their heads, because I've really looked at the plan extensively. And I was just, having a chat when the plan was being rolled out. And I was like, how will the Hustler Fund work? Why the Hustler Fund? And you looked at how the young men and women who are really trying to push small business here and there, if you look at the amount of money that they were paying in interest rates, they were really predatory, all right? Move a little bit further. You had 4 million of them who are actually listed on the CRB.
But what?
You're coming now to nearly 20 million who are actually enjoying the Hustler Fund.
So what was the ultimate goal? Was it to sustain that culture of borrowing? They borrow, they return. They borrow again, they return. Or was it to economically empower them?
Our micro economy is based on borrowing.
So that was supposed to be
that has always been, and it will continue. And by the way, you may choose to go as far back to what Lokomtani they say chamas. It is the very same thing, very same concept. That's how we are in the Kadogo economy. That is what has always been. But you had predators, really. Same way we saw when the economy in the US went down. It was, again, predatory lending practices. Same thing that we saw here. People knew that Kenyans borrow a lot. And yes, they do pay. But the thing was, charge them a hefty interest. Woe unto you if you're not able to come square with the house at the end of that lending period. It was quadrupling. So we're like, yeah, people are borrowing whether we like it or not. How do we ensure that they are able to borrow and pay something that they are able to cover? And that's why I'm saying these were actually great ideas that have continued to work. And that's why, let me remind you something.
12 years down the line, 12 months, I beg your pardon, down the line, how come we're not seeing tangible effects of this plan?
What are you not seeing? See, the thing is, I talk to people who borrow. I talk to people whose small businesses have been impacted positively. Those are the success stories I want to talk about. Now, like I told you, are we there yet? No, we are not. But are we heading in the right direction? Yes, we are. And that's why I told you, if the plan was to be realized, we must believe that today, where we are now, we are in a partial state of development. That is how nations are built. All right? You don't just appear and say, oh, hooray, we've finished, we've attained it. No, it is a progressive advance. So here you have given people a way to borrow, something which they are comfortable with, and they are able to pay. Do you know what you've done to them? You've actually said to them that you can run your business without too much stress of paying those hefty predatory interest rates.
All right.
And when it comes to borrowing, whether we are looking at mortgages, yeah, anything that we borrow, the first thing we look at is that interest rate. How will I be able to pay back? And if things don't go the way I want, what kind of interest rates am I looking at? So when you have somebody who comes and gives you some sort of cushion and tells you, yes, it will not be in the 300, 400%, you still can be able, even if you miss a day or two, you're still able to recover.
All right.
That is how you create small businesses.
That is well said, addressing the interest rate. But how do you tell the Mama Mboga who is seeing the price of sugar double, or almost, you know, the unga that she was told is going to be cheaper, still very expensive, cooking gas going up, cooking oil going up, beans going up, electricity bills going up each and every day. How do you tell this Mama Mboga that you're addressing the cost of living 12 months down the line?
Our production really is based on the cost of power. That has been our Achilles heels. We've noted that as a problem from way back when. What is being done today, and I told you again, go back to what I said, the partial state of development. What are we doing in terms of reducing the cost of power? Right now, it's still high, based on how or where we've been historically. Too much dependency. And I dare say again, too much dependency on hydro. What happens when we have short rainfalls? Immediately, that situation is compounded. Banan. We, just the other day, at the climate summit, the European Union, the reason why they backed, and I think there were some finances that were released, is to continue looking at the R&D of shifting much of our focus from hydro. Because every time we shift there, when we don't have enough rainfall, our electricity will go up. You know why? Because we result into diesel generators. What happens then? So looking into things like geothermal, into solar, that is the only way. And these things they have to balance out. If our cost of production is going to be high, guess what? Then the commodities that we are talking about will definitely go high. Okay. And guess what? The other thing that we must bring to the fore is we became a net importer. Again, we need to relook into that philosophy very keenly, because I can guarantee you, no nation that I know survived on that equation. So I really, really give kudos to the president when he said we need to look deep again into farming. All right. Because that's the only way we are going to bridge half of the things, or half of the problems that we think we have.
I don't know what you think, Eric. Now we are blaming it on the cost of production. I just want that mwananchi who is asking, why is the cost of living still high, to understand why it is still high. From your perspective, how do you address this agenda? What would have caused the derailing of this process? This promise that was supposed to be delivered as soon as possible is yet to be realized. Eric says it's progressive. It's something that cannot happen just in a day. What would be your thoughts on that?
One, I think it's granted that when the president took office, the economy was a bit in a problem. I mean, we were in a slowdown. The global environment also largely contributed to the economic challenges that we were facing. So that is the factual position, and you expect that any change to the economy would be also impacted by that global environment and the fact that the economy was struggling at that particular time. So the question that we want to look at are the interventions, and then how effective are those interventions, and have we seen a level of implementation of those interventions, although we know it is long-term, that gives us confidence that we are on the right path. And I think that is where we're having a problem. So, and one of the examples I was giving was like the Hustler Fund. Of course, it has its own merits and demerits, but I'm basically looking at interventions and how those interventions then give us confidence that we are on the right track. So we go and look at what interventions have been done. There were interventions that were done by the government to allow for importation of edible oil. Do we have a manufacturing industry for edible oil in the country? Yes. Wouldn't it have been more economically, making sense, more economic, to give incentives to the local manufacturers so that they can be able to manufacture that oil at a cost that then would be, that would bring down the cost of that edible oil, as opposed to getting a foreign trader to import products from another country, thereby affecting our local industry in terms of their economic, in terms of, one, the ability to even keep the jobs. So you ask yourself, by importing, you are hurting local manufacturers, you are hurting the ability of the government to collect revenue from the local manufacturers, and most importantly, you are making people lose jobs in a very difficult time. So that's, again, the question that I'm asking. In terms of implementation, are you seeing consistency in terms of what the government intends to achieve? It leaves you feeling a little bit shaky. You move to the next other intervention that was done to allow for importation of fertilizer. A very good intervention. But the farmers are telling you that this fertilizer has been brought in, but we have not been able to access it, and to access it at a price that is reasonable and fair. In fact, what has been happening is that the farmers who are actually engaged in large-scale production have found it extremely difficult to access, because you're being told, you know, you have a limit, 10 bags of fertilizer, 20 bags of fertilizer, and if you're doing large-scale, then you cannot be able to purchase.
But when President William Ruto was coming into power, if I remember my numbers correctly, the price of fertilizer was going as high as 6,000, 7,000, thereabout. Now it's about 2,000.
That's.
I mean, yeah.
I'm not disputing the issue of the prices.
But it is because of the interventions.
No. You see, you have to look at it in this way, that the first intervention that was done on that aspect was to boost food production. So you bring in measures, you bring in short-term measures of saying, okay, let's import. But the product does not get to those that it is intended to benefit. So there are so many other factors. It is not just the importation that has reduced the prices. There are so many other factors that have contributed. Perhaps there were so many inefficiencies in the system that have now been cleared. But the question that I'm addressing here is one of, how are you messaging? How faithful is the implementation? So some of the measures that have been implemented have actually been extremely successful. Some of them have actually sort of been a little bit disastrous. And I think that is where we are saying there is an element of confusion, a little bit of confusion in terms of getting comfort. And that's the bottom line that I'm talking about. Getting comfort that the government is actually on the right track towards resolving the economic challenges that we were facing. So, and you see, the assessment that we are now giving the president is one where everyone is agreeing that at a C, you know, there are certain things that they could have done right, which they haven't done. And so at a C, people begin to say that this is almost fairly reasonable.
Especially considering that he has 4 years.
Yes, and you see, one of the things that is extremely important is to appreciate the work that has been done, but to also point a finger, specifically to point a finger on the things that would have been done well and were not done well, but also, most importantly, to say that if a certain trend continues, then that trend is dangerous for the country. And for me, where I come from, the position that the government is taking and continues to take on matters on rule of law and the administration of justice is one that then continues to send a conflicting message as to where the government wants to take this country.
I want to allow you, Kinaga, to also weigh in. Let's give it to him where he has gotten it right. If you were to assess the plan and how much has been implemented as part of that plan, what inspires you about some of the things that you feel probably the government did right, that already we can begin to see tangible results? It may not be 100%, but this is actually what you feel the government got right.
All right, thanks a lot. It's a good question. I mean, I'm a student of politics. That's what I went to study in school. And one of the things I've learned with our politics, not just here but around the world, is that politicians most times do the things they said they would do. And what does this mean? I think the last 10 years, which is the closest that Kenyans can remember, with the Jubilee government, they promised to build about 10,000 kilometers of road. Most Kenyans didn't question how that would be done. And of course, the government went on to deploy a Keynesian model on development, and that led to the debt, partly, in a huge way, to the debt crisis we are in, because it was infrastructure-led debt and development that was initially, largely just financed from our debt. But coming to the plan, I think I'm one of those Kenyans who also took time to look at the plan, especially last year when they came out. And there were a number of promises that they made, and I hope we'll discuss this sometime as we continue, especially around healthcare. Now we've seen the bills that they've introduced, about 6 bills. What most Kenyans don't know is that you can trace it back to the plan. They may not have mentioned some of those bills in their details, but some of these promises were contained in the plan, particularly around the healthcare component. And I think it comes to us. We need to be reminded. This reminds us that we need to be very vigilant about some of this, especially during a campaign process. Be able to remove the rhetoric from the substance and be able to unpack that. But in terms of what are some of the good things and good measures that the government has taken, I think one of the ones I'd like to appreciate is reducing our deficit this year, in this financial year. I think one of the biggest problems we've had in this country is how we deal with our deficit. And government deficit, like this year, we're talking about a deficit of, I think, about 750 and upwards of 750, close to 780 billion in a trillion, 3.674 trillion budget. And we've often seen deficit coming up at the beginning of a financial year, at the start and not towards the end. And not very elaborate measures to try and reduce the deficit. Because if you don't address the deficit, then it means that we are crowding out the fiscal room to be able to do other things that are important, particularly on promoting public good, which is schools, healthcare, and other social services. So I think reducing the deficit was a really good thing. And I think, and this came out of the budget policy statement early in the year and the debt management strategy paper. I think those were contained there. We've seen a difference in terms of practical solutions. Maybe not, of course we have some challenges in there, but we've seen a bit of measures to try and mainstream the deficit challenge, which I think was one of the promises that they made last year. I think the other good thing, which just juxtaposing back to our political history, is that, for instance, with Kibaki, 1 year in office, he had already rucad, or is it jumped? I don't know what to say. He had failed to honor his MOU with his coalition members. And the NAC, LDP and others. And I think what we've seen 1 year in office is Kenya Kwanza team seems a bit cohesive. I don't know if that's good or bad for the country.
It has helped.
It has continued to remain together. We didn't see that with the Kibaki. I mean, the Kibaki government came in under a lot of, very high promise, a lot of confidence, and people are very excited about that change. And I think 1 year down the line, which is what most Kenyans don't remember, is that a lot of Kenyans were very unhappy with that government. And I think one of the things that I think I'd like to say around that is a need for political honesty. We have a lot of dishonesty in our politics. So if you're able to stick together, I think that the bit was reversing the pot. We've had a lot of advocacy. We've been part of advocacy over the last couple of years, trying to push for reversion of the port operations, trying to challenge the SGR, and how the SGR continues to be the poster child of what is bad about our public finance space and how we do our debt. And I think the reversion was really great. And finally, the employment of the 35,000 teachers, I think that continues to edge us closer towards better outcomes around human development indices compared to the rest of the world. Of course, there is still a huge pack of things I want well, but I think those are some of the main ones for me.
All right, when you talk about employment of teachers, on the other side, he promised 20,000 healthcare workers within 100 days, which is something else. I was talking to the chairperson of the clinical officers, and one of the things there, as the health sector, they were decrying as the major failure of the government is to honor that promise of employing 20,000 healthcare workers. Another promise, Wilkista, though, was a 50-50 representation in government, in cabinet as well. I mean, do you think this has been achieved, or at least some level of significance in terms of going this direction? The women in Kenya, do they feel like they have a space? The young people as well. Ruto was very passionate about empowering the young people. How has he addressed that agenda within the 12 months that he has been president?
Right. I think for me, in terms of whether the agenda for women in the Hustler Manifesto is actually working, they overpromised on that front, and they have under-delivered. And I feel like in this phase is when they're trying to make up for that with the formation of certain committees for the two-thirds realization of the two-thirds gender bill, and also the office headed by, I forget her name, but there's an office for gender that the president commissioned. The
presidential advisor on gender?
Exactly,
yes,
the president, yes, the Chigai.
Mm-hmm.
So I think on that front, this is when they're trying to repair that. But as far as their manifesto and fulfilling this was concerned, that's not something we saw come to light. For young people, again, the UDA party had a whole promise for young people. Actually, there was a manifesto specifically for young people. And pretty much what young people want is centered around employment, lowering cost of living, affordable education, and healthcare. So when I look at, the cost of living has very many aspects to it. So specifically, when I look at something like affordable education and the new funding model that has been proposed by, this current government, it would make sense in a way because it allows for you to dream to join, private universities and be funded to study in those private universities. However, when you look at the categorization in terms of vulnerable, special, needy, less needy, it would be very difficult to determine these different categorizations, and now thereafter, of course, fund according to those categorizations that exist. So as far as affordable education is concerned, I think there's a real struggle there in terms of how specifically the needy have been taken and then clustered again into different segments of you're needy but not very needy, you're needy but... So for me, and I believe for a lot of young people, that's problematic. And then universities have also been asking for a 7% fee, total cost of
before admission.
Yes, before admission. And for a lot of people, that has been something that's not really easy to get, depending, of course, on also what you're going to study in the university, because some of these courses are not also cheap. So it's bittersweet. I mean, in the sense that you imagine a world where you can go to a university you're qualified to attend, a good university, but at the same time, it's almost seeming like it's going to kill a bit the public universities, because as we've seen in the past years, a lot has been deteriorating on that front, especially also because of the new leadership model for student university leaders, which does not quite allow them to have authority in terms of voicing out concerns of students in institutions of higher learning. When I look at making food affordable, because this is a big issue for comrades as well as young people. And I think when Kibaki came into power somewhere around December, 7 days he had done what he said in terms of free primary education. And parents were already being told to bring your kids to school, bring your kids to school. President Ruto has done the same in the sense that he made the fertilizer literally what he said he would, half the price, so that it's accessible, it's affordable for common folk or the ordinary citizen who's a farmer. However, also something Eric said in terms of accessing the fertilizers, it's a difficult process. It's not you go and request for a batch and then get it. It's a difficult process. So that waiting process...
So it may be cheaper, but getting it...
It's not accessible. It's not accessible. We'd like to imagine that it is cheaper, but not accessible. So it is only, in the next harvest where we are going to see whether this input in terms of production is going to lower the cost of food and, of course, allow people to thrive in that sense of being able to afford food and shelter.
All right. Gabriel, would you say that probably this plan was not, thought out 100% at the initial stages because of some of the complexities that, Wilkista or even Erike is sharing, in terms of implementation, some complexities emerging in terms of distributing this fertilizer, in terms of this university fund. It is a good promise, but now how do we categorize these learners? What parameters are we going to use? Would you admit that probably it was not well thought out in terms of implementation? A beautiful promise for a new dawn for the country, but now exactly practically, how is it going to look like?
Actually, that's a very great question that that's an amazing question that you've asked, and I hope I do justice in answering it. Even when you look at InfoTrack, I was just thinking, again this morning, I was just hoping they put the plan aside and then they judged, or when they were doing the poll stuff, when they were conducting it, I hope they used the plan as their guiding principle. What do I want to be edified when I'm looking at that plan is, what did he promise to do? What has he achieved thus far? And that's why I'm saying, remember, again, InfoTrack, to them, I don't think it really gives a lot of strength when it comes to judging somebody who you gave really a very bad grade. going into the election. They were like, this man is nowhere near winning this election, but look at what happened. So again, the trust issues continue to suffice. Having said that, when you look at the plan, it's not like I told you, it's not something that I believe was just thought on top of people's heads. No, this is something that followed a state statistical data. We looked, and they looked at the agenda not only of laying down the focal points on that plan, but also the implementation. And that's why it is very critical to say, what did you promise? What have you done? For instance, immediately the president came into office, what did he do? The first thing he did was put back the 6 judges who are still out in the cold. And again, that was so politicized. He goes on to issue an executive order, making the judiciary financially independent. Again, same thing happens to the Office of National Police Service. Moves again along to higher. When he looked at the CBC pedagogy and the framework, he said, we need to get to point B. How do we get to point B? Already at point A, there are issues. How do we address these issues? We have 50,000 teachers already in play, 30,000 coming again before the end of the year. As we balance the deficit, which was past 6%, 3 billion was removed from that plan. We are now heading in the right direction. And that's what I'm saying. It is not, I don't think it's an inherent situation where we will have a hooray moment. That is not how nations are built. Mm-hmm. It is subjecting things to a progressive advance. Wakili here talked about edible oils. I can guarantee you, we know how that channel is, the channels of production. We know how that works. That does not necessarily mean that in the next 3 years, or 4 years for that matter, you'll still be importing edible oils. That's not it. You can actually work on the deficit that you have currently as you do other things. Let me give you a good example. And this one, I want you to tie it when I say things are subjected into a progressive advance. That's how you get to where you're going, as according to the plan. It was yesterday that they released iPhone 15, right?
Yes.
Look at this example. Did iPhone 10 work? Did it give you mobility?
It did.
Were you able to communicate? What was wrong with iPhone 10? Progressive advance. Progressive advance. Now you have iPhone 15, which tells you that it can solve problems that you don't know you have. That's how you build on progress. There was nothing wrong with iPhone 10. But the current one that you have is able to do more. So when the plan is already in play, it does not mean that it's not working well. When you're talking about fertilizer and how it was distributed, there were teething problems. It does not mean that program is not working. It is actually serving many farmers well. So you cannot piggyback a little bit on some of the issues and teething problems that were there in the beginning and fail to see the bigger picture. All right? You must always, always, always accord the bigger picture. That's what you have to actually give the headlines to. Yeah. Because we can try and point mistakes that have not been achieved, but that is not to say that they are not being sorted. The critical thing, again, which we have to highlight is, what did the president mean when he said we are going to subsidize on production? Why was it as a matter of supreme urgency to move away from subsidizing consumption? Mm-hmm. There was a reason as to that. Because when you allow the farmer to do more, to produce more, obviously the price of food items is going to be affected positively. Okay. So the bottom line here is, even when things are in a partial state of development, we should not say that there was a problem. As long as the original concept was not flawed, things are progressing in the right direction. And I think that's what we need to give kudos to.
All right, there's something else that is emerging. I don't know whether I'm the only one who missed it or everyone else did or something happened. This tax trend that is currently, being discussed. affordable housing was a promise, but nobody said something, or it was not said in the language that now it's being said about housing tax. You know, there was that issue of making healthcare accessible and the cost to be addressed, but nobody said something about increasing the monthly contributions on the insurance fund, the health insurance fund. Then, unless I missed something, Gabriel.
You see, when I mentioned that we were in a grip of a failed economic theory, whether you looked at it from the housing point of view, whether you looked at it from what you're discussing now matters health, you realize some of the measures that we had put in place were not working. For instance, we used to be charged 300, was it 300 for NHIF? Or whereabouts? 500 or whereabouts. It doesn't matter how much money you make. That was the standard. That was not the right way. It has never been. And I'm not trying to say you hurt anybody. Here you're talking about fair contribution. The same thing, universal healthcare, it works nearly. When you look at even places like in the United States, the people who are making more pay more. That is the world of fairness. All right? Let us look at how we get into supporting all these programs that we are talking about. We could have decided to do two things. One, we could have decided to say, we have amazing programs, but what we are going to do to support them, we are going to continue borrowing, because it's the easiest thing to do. And we continue borrowing and put our children and our grandchildren into debt abyss. It's easy, all right? We would have continued borrowing to the yin-yang. But what does the president decide to do? He said, just like most nations, and again, when you look or when we point fingers at nations like Singapore, these are the principles they used. We are so quickly to copy their methods, but we want to ignore their principles of what they did to become the nations that they are in today. So he decides, let us just be fair in matters taxation. And the first thing we need to look at is we stop the borrowing. We tighten our belts to fund the programs that we can fund. As we talk about bringing in investors, as we talk about finding partners who can come and partner with us to build certain infrastructures, when we are talking about universal healthcare, where several presidents have failed, what do I need to do different to succeed? It is by saying, Gabriel, you're making 40,000 a month. You and Mama Mboga, who's making 1,000 a day, cannot actually be in the same bracket of contributing to the universal healthcare. You are earning more. Why don't you just upscale? You're earning so that you are at par.
But anyway.
Or, you know, and that, by the way, that's the law of fairness.
I'll come back to you, Gabriel. Let me allow Theory to weigh in on that. What do you think about Ruto's tax plan and how he's going about it, and even the reason behind it that, you know, Gabriel is explaining this morning, that it's because we are trying to shift from the culture of borrowing and to be able to just tighten our belts a little bit and fund our whatever it is that we are doing within the country. Does it make sense from where you sit?
Let me say this, and I would want to respond to a few things that Gabriel has said. One, we must give the president credit for boldness in terms of some of the measures and that he has taken. And what even Gabriel is saying makes sense, you know, that if we have to have universal health care, perhaps those who earn more ought to just pay something slightly more, so that, you know, you have some element of fairness in that process. And so very good things. But I want to go back to one or two things that he has said so that I can illustrate to you why I still feel like there's a problem somewhere. When the president got into office, he did something extremely good by, you know, giving police autonomy in terms of how they use their money. But what did he go ahead and do? He went ahead and created a position for an undersecretary, who's then supposed to be the accounting officer, which is contrary to the law. And of course, the courts have spoken about it and they have annulled that appointment. Second, the president promised to give the judiciary 3 billion over and above what they are entitled to be given. First of all, this is Kenyan taxes. The president has actually no such power to, make a promise that 3 billion over and above. But it's a good thing because it shows that there is an appreciation that the judiciary doesn't have enough funding. And when you don't have enough funding to the judiciary, you actually affect the independence of that institution because it has to keep coming with a begging bowl. Mm-hmm. But what is the reality? The reality is that the best thing to do would have been to actually actualize the judiciary fund as contemplated in the Constitution. That has not been done to date. Mm-hmm. So there are certain regulations that are there, but what do those regulations mean? Those regulations are a way to still control how the judiciary is able to access those funds and, in essence, defeat the purpose for establishing the judiciary fund. So you promise that you want to give the judiciary, the real reason is to make the judiciary more independent, because the moment they keep coming to ask for money from you, you can tell them, there is that decision you made which we didn't like, and that's why we are not giving you money. Yeah? But in actual fact, what is happening is that you still continue with the methods that have been there to control the judiciary. So in public, you say that this is what you're going to do, but in real sense, you are not moving away from
what has been going
on. And that's a tragedy, and I think I wanted to correct that. The problem of the judiciary accessing its funds is still an issue, because once their budget has been approved by the parliament, ideally it should be a charge on the consolidated fund. And these levels, these controls where auditor control of budget is saying, no, you can't get this money, and so many other people, treasury and whatever, that should not be there. And I think that is something that ought to be solved so that you have the judiciary running and properly. And then also, most importantly, that you look at the executive budget, it is going up. The budget for the legislature is going up, but the budget for the judiciary keeps coming down. And that's something that ought to be addressed. Again, it goes back to the point that I was making. Are you feeling a consistent implementation of promises that makes you feel like we are moving
in the right direction?
Mm-hmm. And that, for me, is where the problem is. That in terms of politics, in terms of management of government, you can tell that the president is fully in charge, but the implementation is wanting. Now we'll come to the question of taxes. And taxes do not just, in one instance, serve one purpose. That is to enable the government to collect money to run its activities. That, of course, is the predominant consideration. But there are other considerations that need to be put into play. One of them is the current economic situation and the current economic reality. And then how do you use taxation to spur economic growth and to give relief to those who are going through difficult economic periods? And that is, I think, the problem of the current regime when it comes to taxation. That it is just take. But you are not seeing an implementation that gives you confidence that if we continue in this manner of giving, that there will be an progress 1 year down the line. Why do I say this? You all remember when the president came into office, the first thing he did was to order austerity measures. So that, every government spending on so many other things so that it's cut down on every other thing. But where did that money go to? Did you feel its impact anywhere? Do you feel that the government that we have right now is a government on austerity measures, or it's a government that is out on a spending spree on matters that are not going to help the country. Mm-hmm. If you look at the numbers, and I'm not very good at this, but if you look at the numbers, the amount the government has borrowed within the short time it has been in office far exceeds what the previous administrations have borrowed. So you have to ask yourself, you've borrowed much, you are a government that is saying, you want to put in austerity measures, you want to tax us more so that you can be able to, in the long term, make our lives much more easier, but we are not seeing you living the talk.
Okay. Wilkista, I also want you to weigh in on this taxation plan, because there's a huge cry about it, especially now, what Theory is bringing out. There is a lot of people who are actually going through a lot economically. Some have even lost their jobs, businesses have closed. There's no money in the pockets of Kenyans, yet the taxes keep going up. I don't know what you feel, from where you sit, and whether this is actually going to help us come out of the debt crisis that the country is currently in.
I think the current regime wanting to engage a lot more in domestic resource mobilization is a noble cause. However, the way they are going about it might not be entirely right, because domestic resource mobilization does not necessarily mean that you raise taxes. It can mean that perhaps you tie where the loopholes are in terms of taxation. For example, there's this whole story about importation at the ports, where there are goods that enter the country. So there's a reporting of output tax, but input tax is nowhere to be seen in the books. So looking at a place like that, where you have a lot of people consolidating and then one person underreporting for whatever goods they have brought into the country and not paying the taxation that is commensurate with the goods that they have brought into the country. If you look at the kind of monies or numbers that the government has lost in terms of revenue collection at these points of entry of goods into the country, it's a lot of money. If you further look at corruption in those particular spaces where you have corrupt KRA officials who don't mind taking some money and then just going ahead to do some things on their portals and showing that perhaps you paid your taxation. So domestic resource mobilization, for me, I think in this direction that they're taking is noble. However, I feel that it doesn't need to go into higher taxes. Perhaps they need to think more in terms of tighter audits to get where we are losing the money, where the cracks are in terms of taxation.
Which is also something he promised, to crack the whip on all corruption cartels and fight corruption. And he was ready to call out those who are actually involved in corruption. So, that is...
Yeah, and the fact that there are goods that were not able to come into the country because of some of those issues that were happening at the port has also affected young people, in the sense that a lot of businesses that young people are carrying out are being carried out in online platforms. And this is also another big thing for the government currently in terms of thinking about regulating TikTok or completely banning TikTok for Kenyans, because young people import these goods in small batches, and then they sell them on those online platforms. Some thrift things on those online platforms. But if we are trying to close these opportunities where young people are also making, money at the end of the day, then it's becoming a lot more problematic. And of course, we're not going to have money in our pockets. And I think one of the measures, even from a very simplistic level of knowing whether the economy is working or not, is if there's money moving around. If there's money moving around, whether it stays in your pocket or not, it's working. However, that is not what we're experiencing.
That is not what we're seeing. I know you have a lot to also share, Eric, but allow me just to sample a few tweets that we have this morning, and then you can also add your thoughts on what has been shared so far. Probably I'll give you a chance to just also weigh in your thoughts on that before we get the the tweets. Remember, we asked you to, comment on what we are discussing in studio this morning at Citizen TV Kenya, at Safina_Chieng. The hashtag is Daybreak. But what is your feeling, though, about this strategy?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think the first is reminding us a function of taxation. They call it the 4 Rs: revenue, repricing, representation, and redistribution. The president in the last year has focused on one main R, which is revenue, which is as a function of taxation. Mm-hmm. And not much focus has been given, especially to representation, because the representative function of taxation speaks to the need for the issue of accountability around where the money is going. And I think my colleagues have spoken about this. Someone alluded to how much money we are losing. And we've seen official reports putting the figures at between 50 to 60 billion every year. That's lost through illicit financial flows. And evidence pointing to the fact that this could actually be higher, than those figures. And juxtaposing that with how much money the government is looking to collect under the housing levy, which is about 73 billion per year. Mm-hmm. Just look at those two figures. Mm-hmm. The amount of money we are losing and the amount of money we are looking to collect to fund the housing levy or build more houses to address social good can actually be financed already from our budget. Mm-hmm. Again, I'll go back to the deficit problem. If you look at how much money we are borrowing in this financial year, it's about, our deficit is about 750 billion. If you look at how much money we are looking to borrow, it's almost close or about the same amount of money. But also looking at previous reports by the Office of the Auditor General that show that we lose up to a third of our budget every year. Mm-hmm. With a budget of slightly above 3.7 billion, that figure is near or close, or actually more than the deficit. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our deficit is also money that is budgeted corruption. And I think these are issues that we must speak about. The issues we must remind the president and his government that while appreciating the fact, and I think early this year the National Treasury included that in their plan, the budget policy statement, while they committed to take a lot more keener focus on the informal sector, because there's there are a lot of Kenyans out here, and I think that's part of our truth, who do not pay their equal share of the burden. And that explains why government has taken the shortcut to revenue collection, which is the very lazy way of collection, VAT, income tax, to an already overburdened people. Because, I mean, you're looking at people who work in the public service, slightly above 900,000. Kenyans who are employed in the private sector, about 2 million. These are the people, a lot of taxation efforts and revenue efforts we've seen targeted to people who are already netted, and not much focus beyond commitments made in the budget policy statement to focus on expanding the tax base. And I think that expanding the tax base is something that we cannot run away from as a country. The second bit is, like I've mentioned, the illicit financial flows, and the fact that we need to be able to be accountable. And I think this must continue to be more like a chorus for Kenyans and for everyone, particularly looking focused to the National Treasury, the Kenya Revenue Authority. We know we are collecting a lot more, and we've seen this practice be devolved in our counties in the form of on-source revenues. Every year we see control of budget reports pointing to the fact that counties are not able to meet their targets. And that looks like a very innocent position of just facts that are on the face value.
But in the end
but behind the scene are counties that are actually collecting more but reporting less. Because so we have especially and this is evident. I mean, CRA, the Commission on Revenue Allocation, has shown that our counties are collecting 30%, only 30% of their potential. And not potential meaning that so the data in reverse is that there's more money being collected than the money that is actually being reported. And you see, this is a problem that has started with Kenya Revenue Authority. Now we're seeing it in the counties. It's becoming endemic.
So we actually have money.
Exactly. We have money, and this
more
money...
than we are willing to admit.
So you go to informal... We work a lot with the informal sectors as TISA, and as an institute, we hold conversations with them and ask them, what is your sense of taxation? Because we see it in government saying, no, there are guys who don't contribute, and a lot of them are within the informal sector. So we went to them, asked them, what are your lived experiences? And many of them feel very overtaxed. In fact, there's a report we're about to release within the month that shows about the sexual harassment issues faced by informal traders that are meted by revenue collection officials, by the counties. But when you go to the same county where those lived experiences tell you that people are overtaxed, you find that the on-source revenue mechanisms are below par. So the question is, where does the money go? The money is somewhere, and it's not with citizens.
All right. I want us to sample a few tweets that we have received this morning as we just be reacting to them. After that, this is what we have on social media. At Citizen TV Kenya is where you can be able to interact with us. The hashtag is Daybreak. Honorable Lillian Sioi there. You say President's agricultural subsidy plan yielded success as he announced a projected harvest of 60 million bags of maize in 2023 during the Africa Food Forum in Tanzania. Ruto credited the program for surpassing the 2022 maize harvest. All right, we have Sir Nixon Ndugira. You say, 1 year down the line and the elephant in the room is yet to be dealt with squarely, corruption and cartels, leading to the greatest worry of whatever heavy taxes will be commensurate to services 100% by the 5th year. All right, we have Bob Otieno Wino. From where we were and where we are right now, President William Ruto has done well 1 year down the line when he took over power, especially on economy. We are heading in the right direction under his stewardship. I give him a 7 out of 10. We have Engineer Lazaro saying, Ruto, 1 year in office full of hypocrites, bitterness, endless hot air, promises, plus continuous political mobilizations. President should be advised now to concentrate with implementation of the campaign pledges and uniting Kenyans. All right, Engineer Lazaro. We have Okello Mwalimu saying, in my opinion, the president has scored highly, an A or on PR stance. However, his scorecard reveals a D on implementation of his plans. He is being let down by clueless, incompetent CSs. I don't know. That's actually a question. Is he being let down? However, kudos to him for hiring more teachers and swearing in of judges. Okello Mwalimu there. Ibrahim Bakari, you say the recent approval rating of President William Ruto by Infotrack shows that he's trying to steer our nation to economic safety. However, he shouldn't relent for a bit on his war against corruption. Right, we have Remy Butia. You say President Ruto has taken several early actions in line with his pledges of economic transformation, despite inheriting a struggling economy caused by external shock. Real progress in the housing, agriculture, and MSME sectors is evident. The over 50% scorecard that can be attributed to President William Ruto as he marks his first anniversary in power is largely brought about by subsidization of production, enhancing homeland. That's Godi Barasa Were. We have one more there saying His Excellency President William Ruto has managed the politics of opposition, but he has considerably underperformed on national issues like addressing university financial issues. It's now 39 months since members of Egerton University earned half salary. So issues still in the university there. That is actually some among of the some views that you have shared with us this particular morning, but a lot is coming forth, and maybe just to interact and dissect a few of them. One was a question that could he probably be let down by some of the cabinet secretaries who I see here on page 5 of this is the Daily Nation. Half of the cabinet rated D on performance. Actually, Professor Kithure Kindiki is among the ones that have been scored fairly here, leading among all the CSs, but half of the cabinet rated D on performance. Could that be the case?
Yeah, again,
there was this whole conversation about the cabinet that President William Ruto appointed. Of course, the strategy was to mix technocrats and politicians. Is that formula working? And are his people backing him?
Well, good question. Again, this one you have to give the president. He has a bird's eye view more than anybody else. He knows the people he hired. He knows the people he brought in to support him in his agenda. But just a few weeks ago, if not months, you saw how cross the president was with some of them when they were coming to sign the performance contracts. And that, he did not mince his words. He was quite equivocal when he told them, listen, you are supposed to be advising me. But when it comes a situation where I know more of what is happening in your ministries, then, there's a lot that needs to be addressed. So I think after giving them that a little bit of tongue lashing, I hope when they sign their performance contracts, I believe we may see a few things happening differently. However, it is also worthy to note that he instituted some great austerity measures when it came to their CSs, how they travel, how they are able to conduct their ministerial duties. The same thing was also, directed to also the PSs, which is a good thing. The last thing you want to do is have globe-trotting CSs, and you have no idea what they are doing. The other thing is opening up Parliament to really, look into their performances.
Yeah. And they were required to go there in person?
Correct. And I think those are some of the things that I think the president has done quite well. In matters corruption, I know somebody has just mentioned that. I know that's going to be a big problem. The president has not shied away again in discussing matters corruption. Immediately we saw when he came in, KRA was actually swept clean. And I think through that exercise, 130 billion extra was collected. So it tells you he has an idea of some of the loopholes that he needs to fix. Now, I am not in any way, shape, or form going to give this a clear thought when you have money that is being wasted, taxpayers' money that is being wasted, whether by national government or by the county government. That should be a no-no. And that's why I was telling you, we need to sometimes even borrow the principles of the countries, the first world countries that were able to deal with matters corruption. Here I'm talking about countries like Singapore and Japan and China. How do they deal with corruption? How do they deal with corruption? And I think these are some of the things. I know the president got some beating around the social media when he talked about Mambo ni Matatu. But I think he needed to have spoken that earlier. If need be, if he's going to put down a staid resolute on dealing with corruption, because I think this, to me, is the cancer that's really dragging us down. I think the president must do all he can to ensure that corruption, we talk about it in shadowy corners, that when you're named in matters corruption, then we know there's nothing that will get you out of that grip. There's one thing also, probably as I finish, my sister alluded to something about closing TikTok. And I don't think that was what was being discussed. We have seen a huge upscale in matters digital economy. In fact, the data penetration that we have seen is humongous and needs to be celebrated. I know young men and women, like she said, who are conducting serious businesses over the internet. And they are really, they have captured great markets that some of us never knew or thought existed. They have been able to move, and they are now trading globally. Yet at the same time, you have people who are now using the same infrastructure as a tool of great abuse. And I believe those are the people we need to target. The same internet that is opening up our corridors into great economic frontiers, may actually be used for bad. And I'm glad that the president was able to meet with the leadership of TikTok and to discuss those things. Because let's face it, you don't want such a huge market engine to be destroyed by people who are carrying bad and illicit content. I know it's hard to fight it, but somebody must do it.
Something has to be done. We're almost running out of time, but I want to also get your insights on the same issue, Theory, the cabinet. There's been concern about how President William Ruto's cabinet looks like. Let's just, talk about it, and whether this could have actually, contributed to some of the failures or the sluggish progress in terms of implementing his plan. He actually even said it himself that he's going to be very stern and he's going to really be on their neck to be able to do what they're supposed to do. And it actually, if you heard him that day, you could get that feeling of somebody who is really feeling like he's being let down to a certain extent. Would you say that his cabinet is also to blame on some of the failures that we are discussing this morning?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, government operates on the principle of collective responsibility. This is a government where there are regular cabinet meetings. It's a government where the president, for lack of a better word, is fully in charge. His hands are totally on the levers of power. And you can tell that he's maybe what you would call a hands-on president. And so if then his cabinet is letting him down and he knows maybe those that are letting him down, he has the option of changing them. The fact that he hasn't changed them means that he is comfortable with them and their performance. And so the performance...
So it still falls on him? Yes,
the performance of his cabinet is his performance because he's comfortable with that performance. So maybe again, some of them may have been rated poorly because it could be as a result of the public perception of how they work. Someone like Kindiki, credit to him. I mean, we had a situation in Baringo quite some time. He used quite unorthodox methods to deal with the situation, but eventually the situation was dealt with. I want to say something, and perhaps because as a way of maybe closing, because we have the finance cases coming up today, and I have to be in court at 9. But I needed to say this because I'm worried when, for example, like Gabriel comes and echoes the message that the president has given, saying Mambo ni matatu. We have to agree as a country where we want to go. Are we going to be a country that is going to be ruled by law or by an individual? Because the president cannot fight corruption on his own. He needs to, at the top, send the message that corruption is something that this government will not tolerate. He needs to push the agencies that are in place to fight corruption and give them the necessary power and tools to fight corruption in a way that we can see that those institutions have been given the power to fight corruption. So he sends the message by saying this government will not tolerate corruption and backs that message by giving the institutions the power and the authority to investigate corruption. And he leaves it at that, and he calls them to account if they do not perform the work that they have been required to do. But when the president wakes up and says, there are judges who are corrupt and we are going to deal with those judges, without particulars of who those corrupt judges are, without the institutions that are charged with investigating corruption making their cases and saying we have evidence against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to see it for what it is. It is what your people are now putting out there as PR. That you are messaging something, that you want to be seen as someone who is having zero tolerance on corruption, but your actions are not matching their words. And that's why majority of Kenyans are calling some of these things PR. And it is absolutely critical that on some of these issues, we avoid what would be seen as public gimmicks, but actually get down to real action. Because for me, the president, in my view, has performed very well on certain things, but his actions, his implementation, to the extent that he appears to be able to say that I will do anything possible to achieve what I want, irrespective of what the law requires, irrespective of what other people think, that is a very bad message, because then what it means is that it is the only things that the president thinks are the right things to be done that would be done.
But how firm do you want him to be, you know, in speaking and calling out those who engage in corruption? That was his version of standing and saying that it is no longer going to be business as usual. Mambo ni matatu. That was his way of saying that message.
That is, I think, in order. I mean, to say that this regime will not tolerate corruption. But to go to the extent of saying, one, that if you do not toe a certain line, then you'll be taken out of the country. You either go out of the country, and you're a citizen of this country, you are entitled to live in this country. That is against the law. And secondly, if you don't, you'll be put in jail. The president has no power to determine that I go to jail, but he has the power to strengthen the institutions that are supposed to investigate and prosecute and ensure that I go to jail for offenses that I have committed. So to that extent, you can say that I will do the following. But the third is even much more troubling, because going to heaven means that you have lost your life. And the president is, of course, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So when he says that that is going to happen, and we all know that there is a process you have to go through before you can lose your life. I mean, and lawfully, it becomes something that should concern all of us.
Right to reply.
Irrespective of whether what the president is saying is the correct message.
All right. Thank you, Theuri, for that. As we close now, Eric, I'd like to give you, a chance to give us your parting shot. I know you have also something to react to as we close this conversation. Yeah.
So I wanted to say, I think it's sort of a surprise to me that some CSs, or at least a majority of the CSs, were rated as they were rated. Because I think the last year we've seen some cabinet secretaries who have not lived up to Article 73 of our Constitution, that prescribes certain ways that and certain modalities we expect of our leaders. One is to promote public confidence. The other is to respect the people and to honor the nation. And all other issues are, around Article 73 and 74. And I think, especially, for instance, Moses Kuria, I think we've seen, I was actually, he's one of the people, when I saw the paper, I was interested to see what the score was. But I think that said, I want to associate with what Erica said, that government is a collective responsibility. Okay. When we continue to see people in the executive who are not living up to the standards set in our Constitution, all right, then it casts aspersions on the appointing authority. But I believe it may be a good time for the president to consider reshuffling his cabinet and maybe getting more people. I think it's healthy for the nation. It's healthy for the nation. There are more Kenyans out there who would serve in those capacities.
What are you suggesting?
We are suggesting
anyway. Allow me to cut you short there because of time. Will Kista, just also your parting shot? We are going into the second year now under the President Ruto administration. What would be your expectations?
So my expectation is tied with the fact that the office of the president is the second highest after that of the citizen, because all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. And that's how we are going to judge the administration. It's not based on how badly the CSS perform. It's going to be based on what they delivered as a collective, because they bargained for office as a collective and the party is the ruling party. Therefore, that's the lens upon which we are going to look at them. I think in this second half, wouldn't be a second half really, but in this next phase of their leadership, I think it would just be to do exactly as they say. Perhaps maybe try to do a lot more of under-promising and over-delivery.
All right. Gabriel?
Very quickly, and I call this a tragedy of commons. I think what Wakili Theuri has said, you can see where he's coming from, but sometimes he also knows very well. The president was speaking to a certain clique of people. He was speaking to a certain group of individuals. And these people, to be honest, they have mastered how to use the judicial apparatus in this country. They'll put a case that will last for years, and we've seen it. Look at a case like the chicken gate that we saw. People in Europe were sentenced to prison already, while in this country, those people have never even faced any wrath. Secondly, we had people who were caught actually and repatriated from this country to face charges in the US, while here they were still eating and drinking with some of the judicial stuff that we know. So the president was speaking to a caliber of people that are known quite well, and they've mastered the art of doing corrupt evils and then using the judicial system as a shield and a way to shield them from these vices. And I think that's what the president was talking about.
All right. Allow me to end it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time and even overran this conversation. Gabriel Mudhuma, governance analyst, asante sana. Eric Theuri, president, LSK, shukran. We also have Wilkista Aduma, executive director, run for office. And also with us this morning is Eric Inaga, program manager, TISA. Thank you, gentlemen, lady, for sharing your insights with us. We are going to be shifting gears in just a bit, talking about matters health. This morning we are talking about fighting malaria, especially in the wake of an announcement or a revelation from Cambridge that they have discovered a new species of mosquito in the country. What are some of the things that we should be concerned about as a populace? And also, what does this mean in terms of the efforts we have put in place to fight malaria? That conversation coming up shortly. Do stay with us. This is Daybreak.